Tonight on South Dakota Primetime, join South Dakota Public Television's Todd David Epp for a call-in with Governor George Mickelson live from the Capitol in Pierre.
Tuesday, January 29th, 1991, on a special edition of State House live from the Capitol in Pierre. It's your chance to ask Governor George S. Mickelson questions about the 1991 legislative session. Call 697-5000 with your questions. Tonight on State House, Ask Governor Mickelson. Welcome to this special edition of State House live from the Governor's Reception Room in the Capitol in Pierre. Good evening, I'm Todd David Epp. Thanks for tuning us in. Today concluded the 15th of 40 legislative days at the South Dakota Legislature. Much of the business the legislature is considering is due to tonight's guest, Governor George S. Mickelson. There are tax proposals, a state budget, education measures, and a host of other issues that the governor has before legislators. Tonight, if you have a question about the governor's proposals or about what's going on in Pierre, give us a call now at 697-5000. That's 697-5000. And phone volunteers this evening are from the Brookings County Republicans, and our thanks to them. And with that, Governor Mickelson, thank you for being on this live State House special and taking our viewers' calls.
Ted, thank you. Appreciate your being here.
It's always nice being in this room. It is very beautiful. I don't think either of us got to see a great deal of the State of the Union address that President Bush just gave, but was there anything in there that you found interesting or enlightening or helpful to South Dakotans?
Well, I think I saw most of the address, at least until I had to come in here and had the microphone put on, but he obviously paid a great deal of attention, and appropriately so, to the troops that are in the Mideast, and talked with an awful lot of pride about this nation and the mission for world peace that we really have through this effort, making a point of the fact that we didn't ask for this, but it was thrust upon us. On the domestic level, there wasn't a whole lot of specific things that he mentioned, although he touched all the appropriate buttons. Talked about economic development, about health care, about the importance of education. There is one thing that really caught my ear, and that is that he indicated that there were over $20 billion worth of programs that for efficiency in the federal government, he intended in block grant form to turn over to the states to administer. Fully funded and allowing the states the flexibility to operate programs in accordance with the priorities that have been developed by the states. And I find that extremely interesting and want to learn more about it.
Well, this has been one of the complaints, at least in the past few years, hasn't it, that the federal government will mandate certain programs, but the money isn't always there. Do you think this would help alleviate some of those problems in social services and so forth?
Well, you know, $15 to $20 billion is a lot of money, but that isn't going to include social services, human services, and those kinds of things. So I'm not sure what programs that he's talking about, but perhaps he's talking about such things as the elderly transportation, something that I heard at all of the Cracker Barrels that I was at last weekend, the people who are concerned about elderly and disabled transportation. Those kinds of programs perhaps are what he's thinking about. But the key is that he said fully funded. So I'm assuming that what he is doing is talking about some of the smaller programs that would allow the states to administer them with the priorities that we have. I can think of, the best example I can give you is like the Department of Labor, where there are, say, 24 programs that are mandated by the federal government. There isn't enough money for a state like South Dakota, as small as we are, in any one of the programs to do all of them really well. I would like to do 15 really well instead of 24, and if we could set our priorities and be able to block up that money, I think that that would be just great.
Kind of more along the lines of how a corporation would work, setting your priorities and meeting those priorities.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, you know, I remember in President Reagan's first term, he tried the same kind of thing.
New federalism, I think.
New federalism. There's a traditional resistance by Congress. Congress likes to have its fingers on those kinds of programs rather than having the governors of the individual states administer the programs. But I certainly agree with it, and I'll be really interested in seeing. In fact, I'm going to a National Governors Association this weekend, a meeting in Washington. We have twice we meet with the president, and perhaps we'll hear more of that.
Okay, well, let's move on to some issues that we've been talking about here in the Capitol. Today there was a meeting here with the airline authority and the mayors and city commissioners and other city officials of the 8 cities served by the interstate airline. And the news wasn't exactly glowing that there's the possibility of having to cut Mitchell and Huron from the routes, increasing the subsidy perhaps, and possibly even shutting the airline down. Do you think the state airline proposal was something worth doing? Is it still worth doing? And when are we going to see when we're going to try to continue it, or if we're going to end it?
Todd, there isn't any doubt that it is worth doing. We're the first state in the nation that has tried it, and we're one of the most rural states. Transportation is extremely important. I would ask the people to remember 10 years ago we spent $30-some million on a railroad program because we did not want to lose rail transportation. We have the real possibility of losing air transportation. We've got to be the only state capital in this nation where you can't get to the major cities in a direct way, even to make connections outside of the state. We can to one of them, but it's very difficult. And so it is worth looking at. And frankly, the news, as we take a look at the ridership, the people in the state that have used it, it has not been as expected. In fact, it's been far below expected, and therefore the subsidies are going to be more than expected. The options that were discussed today were certainly some short-term management decisions, as you indicated, shortening the routes by cutting out a couple of the municipalities. And then there's going to have to be a discussion about whether or not we want to continue to subsidize. The message that came to me from the municipalities that were here were that they continue to be supportive. In fact, if I heard correctly, Aberdeen even agreed to put in more money because they believe that it is that important for Aberdeen to have the connections to the other cities in the state. Marketing is something that was very rightfully criticized. And after 80-some days of operation, I think it's appropriate that we step back and take a look. Ultimately, the legislature is going to have to decide that. I'm going to answer your question directly about the time frame. They're coming back Thursday of this week to meet with the airline authority. These are the people that designed the system and received the study and made the recommendations and introduced the legislation last year. And depending on what comes out of that meeting, some of those decisions will be made. I'm going to have to make the decision along with the legislative leadership probably by next week.
Okay, if you have a question for the governor, give us a call now, 697-5000, and the governor will answer your questions. I also have a bill tracker with me, Governor, in case we have to look a bill up that a viewer has a question about. That's kind of fun to do sometimes. So this is a great opportunity to ask our governor what's on your mind. We had a question come in early before we started from Sioux Falls on solid waste, garbage. Two-part question. They ask, I hope I'm doing the question justice, and if not, we'll decipher it. If your waste management bill was to be modeled after the solid waste management plan work group's 15-year plan, why was this bill drafted before the 15-year plan was approved? Now, I'm not exactly sure what they're talking about, but
I'm not either, but I can. The bill on solid waste management, which sets a policy, long-term policy.
This is your bill. This is an administration bill.
This is my bill that has a long-term policy to reduce the volume of solid waste in the state of South Dakota, encourage municipalities and counties to to look at alternatives to landfills such as recycling, and that was drafted. I'm not sure what the question means about the date of drafting, but it was drafted after I met with that committee that met over the summer and endorsed many of the proposals that we incorporated into the bill.
And the second part is, why were there no changes then on your final bill based on the public input given at the solid waste management plan hearings, which I think you kind of answered. Okay. I guess continuing on garbage, last year we talked a little bit about things the state government could be doing to reduce the amount of paper we use and then recycling the paper that we use and everything from motor oil and so forth. Where are those plans at right now?
Well, one of the things we talked about recycling motor oil in the Department of Transportation, that is currently being done. That is big business. There's a lot of motor oil that is used in state government, and the Transportation Department has done a good job of that and is currently handling it. Paper recycling continues to be a problem. We create a lot of paper in state government here in the city of Pierre, and finding a market for that has been a problem. We're working with some adjustment training centers. There are some municipalities that are working at recycling programs. The city of Pierre, the mayor of the city of Pierre, very interested because of the problems that are being caused at the city landfill here and working out those kinds of problems. So they're coming along. One of the proposals in the solid waste management bill that the viewer called in about is some pilot projects for recycling and to encourage curbside recycling in all of the larger communities in the state within the next 5 years. I think that's very important, and we need to continue to work toward those kinds of goals.
So that'd basically be like your metals bin and your paper bin and so forth?
Yeah, Rapid City has a curbside recycling program with waste management. It is very cost efficient for the people that take advantage of it, and it is profitable for the company. My philosophy is that in solid waste management there are two basic kinds of philosophies. One is that you can pass laws that make everybody a criminal if they do not do certain things. The other way is to create a profit incentive, and I have a lot of faith in Yankee ingenuity or South Dakota ingenuity that if there in fact is a revenue stream, a profit motive at the end, somebody is going to figure out a way to handle the problem. And that the latter is the tack that we've taken.
Tomorrow, as you're aware, the Lone Tree authorization bill is scheduled to be heard and I think possibly decided in the Senate State Affairs Committee. Do you support or oppose the legislature authorizing Lone Tree? And what, if anything, are you telling legislators about how they should vote on the issue?
I'm not telling legislators how they should vote on the issue, and my Department of Water and Natural Resources, the technicians there who have worked on this issue now for a couple of years, the geologists, the hydrologists, the engineers, are going to present the technical information to the committee. And to summarize the information that they're going to present is that if you're going to have a landfill, this is one of the best places in the nation to have one in terms of it not creating any environmental hazards. I've made quite clear my public policy feelings on that. If it is of any regional significance, I think that we ought to look for ways to make it successful if it passes. But the voters in November made the public policy decision an issue with the legislature, and I don't know how it's going to turn out, but if they pass it, it'll come to my desk and I'll sign it.
SDDS, the owners of Lone Tree, are going to be suing or are suing the state of South Dakota over the initiated measure that you just mentioned that passed in November. SDDS, I think, is saying that the measure effectively shut them down, and they, I think, want $50,000 a day in damages. Do you think this is blackmail coming at this point in the legislature, or do you think they are legitimately defending their property rights in this issue?
Well, I know that I just received the pleadings today, and as I read the pleadings, I know that they're very serious, and it creates a very serious potential liability for this state. Certainly the license that has been given to SDDS is a property right. I'm not going to judge the legality of the pleadings. I know the people to be people who would not I mean, I think blackmail is too strong a word, excuse me, and I've heard that used before. But I would just as soon have the legislature and this state go through this process without that lawsuit, but it's here, and I got sued, so I'm going to defend it.
Well, we also knew that if this passed, this was a distinct possibility, too.
Well, obviously this issue was raised during the last legislative session.
Okay, let's move on to taxes. You and your staff just made a number of stops across the state regarding your tax and budget proposals. What kind of reception did you receive?
Well, I'll tell you what, all day Saturday, we were in 9 different communities, or 8, I guess it was, different communities, and then I was here in Pierre at a public meeting on Thursday night. And all throughout the communities of this state, there's a great amount of interest. I was in Rapid City, and the place was full in the classroom building on the School of Mines campus. People were very interested. I was down in Sioux Falls at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and over 300 people were in the cafeteria at Lincoln High School. And the meeting in Mitchell had to be moved to a larger room because there wasn't space. So the reception was very good, and the interest is high, and that is obviously why we did this. We wanted people to ask questions, to hear the proposals, and to, you know, what we asked them to do was contact their legislators and let them know what their feelings were. If there's a common thread, Todd, that I heard every place that I went, with very few exceptions, there was no one who did not agree with the idea of investing more in education, holding property taxes down, investing more in water development. So we get down to a point of what is a funding mechanism, and there are 2 proposals that are on the table now, one which will work and one which will not. But certainly I did not see any support at all for spending the savings account of this state, which some are proposing in this legislative session is a way to do that.
Well, I understand that one of the topics of discussion, or at some of the stops, was about an income tax. I believe there was a Kello Rapid City poll before the election that said that, asked people based on a number of different sources of taxes, and one of them had to be increased. A corporate income tax, I believe, was the top of the list. Would you consider that possibility this year as a way to give you that money you need for the ending balances and to fund teacher salaries and education and water projects? Is that totally off the table?
I don't support it, so in terms of that being off the table, that's my position. I don't control what goes on in the legislature in terms of what's introduced, and I know it will be introduced and it will be a topic of discussion. A 6% corporate income tax would not raise the money that we are talking about in this proposal, would not do the job, even if it were enacted, and I don't agree. If we're going to have an income tax, it should be a personal and a corporate income tax, and I don't believe there's support for that at all.
Okay, let's go to a question from Brookings. They say, does your campaign pledge to raise teacher salaries to 41st in the nation also apply to college teachers, since they are currently ranked 50th?
Well, certainly it does, and although we started the program for faculty salary enhancement in higher education institutions last year, that was a program that I bought into last year. There was $2 million in the budget specifically above and beyond the salary package for faculty enhancement. There is in the proposal that I have submitted to the legislature this year also.
Okay, a couple of viewers would like to go back to the Lone Tree issue for just a minute. A viewer from Frederick would like to know, if the court dictates that South Dakota must accept out-of-state garbage, why not consider a high import tax on garbage shipped in, like $5 or $10 a ton? And then another viewer says, voters decided they didn't want the Lone Tree site. She's confused because how can SDDS sue the state? Was there some sort of contract between the two to provide a waste site?
Well, answering the last question first, the basis of the lawsuit is here was a company that had a license, and the initiated measure that was voted on by the people in November was retroactive, and so it applied to something that had been done a year ago, and SDDS, the whole tenor of their lawsuit now is that SDDS said we had a license based on what happened before, and that this was in a form of ex post facto law, I would assume, is the meaning of it. And I forget, what's the other?
Yeah, the other one want to know if we have to accept, they're saying if we lose this case.
On the fees.
Right, can we have a high, I guess essentially a tax or fee on it?
The current status of federal law is that you cannot discriminate. By virtue of the Commerce Clause, you cannot prohibit interstate commerce such as this. But there is a design of a system, of a fee system that probably could meet those federal standards. But currently the law is that you cannot charge more for out-of-state disposal than you would for in-state disposal, just simply because it's out-of-state. But Congress is currently considering a modification of the Commerce Clause, and that might be something to look at in the future.
Okay, another garbage question from Aberdeen. They say that for the last 2 years that you've opposed out-of-state garbage, and they'd like to know why does it now appear that you are uninterested in exercising the opportunity to be a leader on the out-of-state garbage issue?
Well,
I guess they're they're not agreeing with your position on this, Governor.
Yeah. Well, again, I can only reiterate I've made my position very clear, and it really hasn't changed. However, that's water over the dam now, and the decision on public policy was taken away from this administration, given to the legislature. So the people did not vote to have the people vote on the license. The people voted to have the legislature vote on it. I'm assuming that they, the voters of this state knew what they were doing, and that's the issue that is going to be before this legislature.
But wouldn't you have to admit, though, during the campaign that both sides painted it as you're voting for or against Lone Tree? I mean, that's what the television ad said. That's what they said on our debate, for the most part. I mean, granted, that's what the amendment says, but don't you think that's what in people's minds they were voting on?
Well, I can't attest to what was in people's mind, but it very clearly said that the policy decision would be voted on by the legislature, and I don't think anybody misunderstood that. I do agree that people perhaps figured if they were voting on it, that was a vote against Lone Tree in and of itself. But that is not the way the initiated measure was drafted, and so that isn't the effect of the law.
Because it could also apply to other large-scale landfills that would come in.
Well, whether it's SDDS or any one of them, what the initiated measure did, very consciously, was give to the legislature, taking away from the Board of Minerals and Environment the public policy issue and giving it to the legislature.
Are we really talking about a problem with timing because the Board of Minerals and Environment had issued the permit, the construction permit, and then we have the initiated measure, and then we have the legislative process? Since in part SDDS was given at least a partial right to start conducting business. Is that part of the problem that we're dealing with?
They were under construction and the law shut them down. So by virtue of it being retroactive, that's why I'm being sued.
Spoken like a lawyer. Okay, let's go on to some other things, Governor. They'd like to know, this viewer from Sioux Falls, when you're going to look at all the incarcerated prisoners and give them proper training and treatment. Well, this state is spending more money than we ever have in the history of the state on incarcerated prisoners, on our people that have run awry of our criminal justice system, and unfortunately, I just assumed we didn't have to spend any money. However, in this particular budget, we're spending a tremendous increase, a $1.1 million special, just to take care of the numbers that we have in our adult correction system currently. I would imagine that the person that called in has somebody that they are particularly interested in rehabilitation and training, and that's a very appropriate question. We have to do more than just warehouse the men and women, and hopefully our recidivism rate will remain one of the lowest in the nation if we do a good job of those kinds of things. I announced in my State of the State message that we had, after working on it for 4 years, received certification from the United States Justice Department for another prison industry, for a prison industry. And I am very hopeful that within the next few months we'll be able to create a prison industry. The whole theory behind that is that the inmates who take advantage of prison industry get training in some area that he would otherwise not receive training in, so that when he gets out he has a vocation. He also earns money because the employer, the industry, is required to pay him,
and then he pays you and I, the taxpayers, part of his cost of incarceration. So it's a win-win situation.
Would it be appropriate to say that with these proposals, with prison industries and the community corrections bill that I believe passed the House for Pennington County, we've seen kind of a privatization of corrections as one of the possible solutions?
Well, privatization of corrections is not a new idea, for the most part, it is really much more expensive than we currently run our system. However, the community corrections concept, where we have low-risk, minimum security prisoners who can be sentenced as an alternative to a community correction system as opposed to the penitentiary, work during the day and go to jail at night, pay for their keep, and also support their families and contribute to the victims of crime funds and those kinds of things, is also win-win. We happen to have a company that is in our neighboring state of Wyoming that has had a good record in that, and we're going to try it. Wyoming currently has, I think, 2 such facilities, and they are expanding to 3 because it has worked so well. So this is kind of a pilot thing that we're talking about, and Pennington County has been picked simply because about 24% of all of our population comes from that area of the state. There is a real need for it right there. There are lots of communities that are interested in a community correction program. Huron, I've received mail and telephone calls from good friends of mine in Huron suggesting that they would be willing to host one, have a facility. I met with a group from Union County today that suggested a site. And so I know there's a lot of interest around the state in it, but we're going to try one, see how it works. We should save 1/3 of the cost of housing that inmate if it works correctly.
Also, I think as you've acknowledged in your Youth at Risk program and other programs, that a lot of the people that end up in prison have drug and alcohol problems. They've been abused sexually or physically. Isn't the real solution, I guess, getting like education and social services and so forth to keep those people from even going to prison?
Todd, yes, to answer your question, yes. Education, the drug and alcohol problems are tremendous problems. In the 4 years that I served on the Board of Pardons and Paroles, I sat there for 4 years hearing probably 80 to 90 cases every month. And I would venture to say that 85 to 90% of everybody there is there because of a drug and alcohol problem. So that is very much of a problem. And the rehabilitation programs that we have in that area are very important.
Okay, got a call from the penitentiary. Excuse me, from Sioux Falls. Well, maybe it's from the penitentiary. Maybe they got phone privileges tonight, just for our show. They say the Sioux Falls Penitentiary has about 20 people a month receiving alcohol treatment. They say that the program has been cut, and now there are over 100 inmates on the waiting list for the program before they can be released. Shouldn't South Dakota think about contracting this program to qualified organizations? Other states find this more productive and cheaper. Is that a possibility? We talked about in terms of incarcerating people. What about for some of the services that are provided?
Well, alcohol treatment and sexual abuse treatment and drug treatment and all of the problems that get people in trouble. The reasons for them committing crime in the first place are certainly looking at contracting with agencies is something we should look at. We have beefed up the staff over the last few years in that.
And one more prison question again from Sioux Falls. With the new prison facility being built, where is the $4.8 million coming from for the 288-bed addition? And if rehabilitation is important, how come there's only 3 classrooms?
The money is coming from Lotto.
That's only one of the few dedications in the lottery.
It was dedicated, Lotto money was dedicated to pay for that facility, and so the people who are buying the Lotto tickets are paying for the penitentiary.
Okay, a viewer from Huron would like to know, on a completely different subject, what are you going to do to improve health care for state employees? What are you proposing for better benefits at a lower cost?
Health care costs are not going down, and we're kidding ourselves if we think they are. The state of South Dakota has a flexible benefit plan that has been devised through consultation with state employees, insurance companies, through our Bureau of Personnel. And it is our hope that through this flexible benefit plan that people can better design the plans, the health care plans that are needed individually for them, that fit them. Anytime you get a group policy as large as the state of South Dakota for public employees, you're going to have some high-risk people that necessarily drive up the costs, but we're working very hard to keep the costs down. This year the increase in costs has been minimal, but last year there were some large increases in dependent coverage costs, and that seems to be the trend in all of the health insurance.
Another state employees question, how is, this is from Redfield, how is the budget, or I think more accurately, the pay increases for state employees coming through the legislature? Where's that at right now?
We spent a lot of time, our Bureau of Personnel and my Chief of Staff, Frank Bross, Pam Roberts, who is head of the Bureau of Personnel, held meetings all over the state with state employees, and this has been a lot of work. The culmination of this has been a salary package that I think is understood better than most salary packages and well received from the comments that I've heard about it. In principle, the salary package has been agreed to by the Appropriations Committee on a bipartisan vote. They have endorsed a pay package in concept, so it will be built into the budgets as the individual agency budgets are appropriated.
Viewer from Mitchell, let's go to taxes for just a little bit. This is a little bit garbled in translation between going to our phone volunteer and being faxed to us here in Pierre. Let's see if I can make the best of it. There's a bill before the legislature, I believe, to decrease the excise tax and manufacturer's tax on equipment. And they would like to know why should that be cut when many companies receive low-interest ready loans from the Ready Loan Fund. They oftentimes get tax breaks from the municipalities or the counties, and why they should get a break when, like, farm equipment, I think also is taxed at 3% rather than 4%. Isn't it?
All this does is make manufacturing equipment the same as farm equipment.
Yeah. And they're saying that, well, the farmers maybe need the bigger break because he's saying, the viewer from Mitchell, that they would their money stays here in the state. I guess it's kind of a philosophical question.
Well, this was a tax commission recommendation, and it was a high priority. Farm equipment is taxed at 3% as opposed to 4% for sales tax, and this just makes manufacturing equipment the same. I understand that some people might think farm equipment or some other type of equipment has a higher priority than others, but certainly I'm a big believer in maintaining the farm equipment tax lower than our regular sales tax, but I'm also in favor of making sure that as we work extremely hard to diversify our economy, that we encourage more manufacturing in the state of South Dakota, and I think that's a step in the right direction.
I think the guy is asking, why should they get a break? Simply. Okay, I think that's an interesting question. A viewer from Crestbar would like to know, do you support House Bill 1126, which makes it unlawful to perform an abortion when it's being used as a method of birth control, and what are the chances of it becoming law?
Yes, and very good.
Now, you had mentioned in the news conference last week that you thought there were some technical problems with the bill. What do you see as those problems?
Well, my concern when I first read the bill was that if it repealed all of our current abortion statutes, and then this did not meet the muster on the constitutionality question, that we would end up without having any abortion statutes at all. I have read the bill, I have looked at our current code, and that is not the fact. If for some reason this did not pass the constitutional muster, then the current abortion law that we have would remain in effect.
And would you sign it if it comes to your desk?
Yes.
Okay. A viewer from Watertown would like to know, if a woman's name appeared on the list of candidates qualified to fill the vacant Supreme Court position, would you appoint the woman even though the other candidates might have more judicial experience?
I'll appoint the best qualified person, man or woman.
And let's see, the position that's open is the southeast part of the state, that district?
Well, the Supreme Court districts are, yes, to answer your question.
Lincoln, Vermilion area,
that's
Sioux
right.
Falls. Okay. Okay, some gambling questions. Viewer from Sioux Falls. If a municipality passed an ordinance banning lottery games within the city limits, would you support that local decision by asking the Attorney General to refrain from enforcing the state's lottery laws against the municipality, and by asking the Attorney General to intervene in any legal proceedings brought against the municipality to declare the ordinance unlawful? I guess what they're saying is, would you allow a city to pass an ordinance to prohibit video lottery than not pick on them, put it in the vernacular?
Well, I'm not going to request the Attorney General to do something that the law requires him to do, if in fact it does require him to do it. Municipalities have certain control measures. The power of a municipality is limited by what the legislature specifically gives them authority to do. Does not have any inherent powers, and so as the lottery law or gambling statutes were adopted, they were adopted as they applied in the case of Deadwood. That only fits that particular city, but the rest of them are statewide. I'm sorry, Todd, I don't know how else to answer the question. I can say very matter-of-factly that I will not ask the Attorney General not to do something that he may be required to do by law. We don't wink at the law, and so if that's what the viewer is asking.
Let me paraphrase this then just a little bit. Could a city pass an ordinance to say no lottery? Would that be legal? Would that be constitutional?
I do not know that I know the answer to that. I don't think they can. However, indirectly they can pass an ordinance because of where lottery is legal. Video lottery, for example, the city has some control over the liquor licenses, and that it can be controlled in that way.
Okay, we've got a number of education questions. Let me see if I can combine some of these. Okay, from Vermilion, what do you have in mind for spending more money on education? What are some of your education plans? And they'd like you to be specific. And from Mitchell, kind of the opposite end of the scale, would it be possible to put a moratorium on some of our wants, particularly in the area of education? Why do we throw more money at education instead of specifically concentrating on the basics such as writing, reading, and arithmetic?
Let me answer the question this way. First of all, I agree that more money does not necessarily guarantee quality education, and unfortunately, as we go through this legislative session, we're talking about budget for education, and we're only talking about money. However, there are some quality legislation issues that are very important, some that were enacted last year that are maturing, and some that will be acted on by the legislature at my request during this session. To answer the question about specifics on funding, my base budget calls for $6.6 million more for education. That does not reach the goals that I wish that it would reach, and therefore I have asked the Tax Commission to support the package that I have been talking about, which would supplement the education budget by another $15 million, or a record $22 million. However, the $6.6 million is still more than the average appropriation for state aid education in the 10 years prior to the dedication that we did 3 years ago. And the dedication has resulted in record amounts of state money for education. It has two purposes. First of all, I hope it holds down property taxes, and secondly, I believe that our teachers and other educators in this state need to be paid more for that. Education is the very foundation of the future of this state, and I believe that very sincerely. Now, specifically, my recommendations on the $22 million is $3.2 million, which would be the final step to the state paying 100% of special education costs. There's money in there for post-secondary vocational education. There's money in there for public television, which you might be interested in, some programming for public television. There is also a teacher pay package of $9.5 million that would be available on a matching basis, where if passed by the legislature, would move us to 45th in the nation, assuming those ahead of us went up 3%. And then the balance would go into the state aid formula. And I think that this is a giant step. We have an opportunity as a state to take a giant step in catching up and rectifying some things that have gotten askew in the way that we fund education in this state. We can do it in this 1991 legislative session.
A more specific question about education from Rapid City. How do you feel about increasing the age requirement for children entering kindergarten? There's a bill to raise the requirement to age 5 by June 1st.
You know, I'm not sure that I understand all there is to know about that issue. I know that Representative Johnson, who is a prime sponsor on that bill, and by the way, that passed the House, I think, within the last couple of days. It did last year also, and then it met its demise in the Senate. I believe that she feels very deeply, and she is a teacher, she's an educator, and she feels very strongly that more maturity before entering kindergarten is very appropriate. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I need to talk to her. You know, I think I agree in concept with it, and I'm going to listen to the debate, and I would be delighted to hear what people think, professionals, educators feel about the age of children. Are we starting them too young? Would that extra few months make a difference? I know it would in some children. Whether or not it should be adopted statewide as a matter of course, I'm not sure.
Well, we have some more tax questions. From Lesterville and Sioux Falls, they'd like to know, how can you justify property taxes when farmers pay most of the property taxes toward education, whether or not you have income or not? Doctors and lawyers own less property but make more money. What's wrong with state income tax? And the other question from Sioux Falls, why do you and the legislature so fear an income tax of any sort? It seems successful in other states. Why are Republicans so anxious to put additional sales taxes, which is the most regressive tax?
I don't argue the equity of an income tax. I argue, you know, this state had an income tax and it was repealed because it didn't work. And it didn't work because we did not have a broad enough based economy in this state to support an income tax. And so I don't argue the equity of it. If you have the money, you should pay it, you can pay it, and that may be a reality at some point in this state's future. But when we rank as low as we do in personal income, it makes no sense to me, although you can always talk about lawyers and doctors, or you can talk about corporations. The fact is that there are not enough of those people that are going to bear the tax burden or make a significant dent in the tax burden. You've also got an awful lot of other people who, you know, the wage earners that are not paid enough in South Dakota, and we need to work at that. And those people who are W-2 type wage earners, I just don't believe that an income tax is something that we can either depend on or would be fair for the state of South Dakota. Now, I know that there are a lot of people that do not agree with that assessment, but that is the way I feel, and I have said that very clearly. We have an awful lot of work to do in broadening the economic base of this state. We currently need to do everything that we can to make our state of South Dakota somewhat unique to attract both the workers and the companies that would come here to help broaden our economic base.
Well, I noted yesterday when you spoke before, I believe, House State Affairs, rather, on your proposal for the corn wet milling plant, that one of the things you had listed on your flip charts concerned that South Dakota did not have an income tax, and you listed this as one of the incentives for AGP to come to South Dakota. Is this something that they definitely look at in part of their overall view of whether or not they're going to locate here?
Well, I'm certainly...
I guess what I'm saying, is it a bargaining chip for you?
It certainly is something that is significant. In the case of AGP, the corn wet miller that we are trying to woo to the state of South Dakota, in using their figures, that's a $20 million item over 10 years, so it's not something that they can sneeze at.
Okay, I have a question of my own on reconciliation. We haven't heard as much this session as we did last year. Last year you kicked off the year of reconciliation, big ceremony in the rotunda, and we had a lot of different things go on during the year. What further plans or ideas do you have to foster the reconciliation process this year? What do you have in the works?
We have a very definitive plan in the works, and Friday of this week we will announce it and kick it off. I intend to use the news conference, the regular news conference that I have on Friday to do that, and have a resolution prepared.
Okay.
What I'm really hoping, to expand on this, what I'm really hoping is that we can get all of the people of this state, the communities. This needs to be a grassroots effort. I believe that political leaders, whether they're legislators or tribal chairmen or a governor or whoever it might be, can really kind of set an example. But the real reconciliation will come about when there is a real recognition of an attitudinal change from the grassroots level. And so the whole concept of what I believe to carry on the reconciliation effort has to be is to encourage communities and organizations and individuals and different groups such as churches and schools and so forth to pick up this ball and really run with it. I believe that our responsibility at the state level should be, again, to set an example for this, and I am going to continue to work as hard as I have in the past toward this reconciliation effort. I believe that it has been successful, and I want to really make this a success over the next 4 years that I have the privilege of sitting where I do. But the real success of this is going to be determined by how willing people are in the grassroots level to pick up the ball and run with it.
Is there anything further the state can be doing? It seems like education is so important to this. Education in the sense, I think, for whites to understand the importance that Native Americans put in treaty rights and understanding the treaties and understanding Lakota history. Is there anything going in that direction? I think there's an SDEA program, but is there anything else to try to infuse more Native American history and culture and so forth into children when they're at a young age?
Well, the way that we're going to design the mechanism for this continuing effort, that is going to be up to those organizations that are going to be represented. I ask organizations to nominate people to serve on a council. And so those organizations are going to have, if they want to discuss treaty rights, if they want to discuss education, they want to present some sort of an agenda along that line, then they are free to do that. And they are going to divide the responsibility over the next several years to carry on this tradition. So I think that that should be done. I think that understanding each other's culture, I think education, as I've said before, is the very foundation for what we're going to do in the future. And I am very gratified that education organizations have really picked up the reconciliation effort. Higher education, K-12 education, there are school exchanges, teacher exchange programs that took place last year, and I just think that that this is exciting, and it is something that is long overdue.
With the movie Dances with Wolves and the national press that South Dakota got this past year, I mean, there are articles in Time and Newsweek and the Washington Post and the Chicago Tribune and elsewhere, do you think that that has paid some dividends for our image, the process that was started last year?
Well, there just can be no doubt that Dances with Wolves, as far as an image goes, I mean, we could spend all the money that we have to promote South Dakota, and we probably would not be as successful as Orion Pictures and Kevin Costner has been in that. That was a beautiful story. It was well done. People feel good about it. But you know, what is really neat about that is the pride of the Native American people as they see, you know, it brings out all the emotions, and the pride that they are showing is going to go a long way toward this reconciliation thing. So I think that's just, I mean, I couldn't have planned it any better. It's just dumb luck that we started the year of reconciliation and they decided to film this. Maybe that's fate. Maybe there's some fate involved in that, but I think we were very fortunate, and it's going to pay big dividends for South Dakota.
Let's go to a few more questions. We have about 7 or 8 minutes left. Viewer from Geddes, how can you say that you're for rural development in South Dakota while the Department of Education is continually closing small high schools in the state? And then we have a viewer from Scotland. If it's inevitable that small schools close, causing severe economic hardships in these towns, how can the state help these communities, especially communities of 200 or 300 people or less?
Yeah. Well, the first question is just a flat mistake. I mean, that is not accurate. Our Department of Education is not closing schools. They have no intention of doing it. That is a decision that has to be made by the people in that area. The people in those areas, in those small communities, you know, schools, I appreciate the fact I was educated for part of my elementary education, at least, in a small town. Understand that school serves as the community center and as a base, and I know how important the school is to that community. But ultimately, the taxpayers of that school district are going to have to decide whether or not they are willing to pay higher taxes in order to do it. And likewise, this legislature sitting up here in this session with repeal of the hold harmless and paying attention to the formula, the state aid formula, there are some penalties in terms of for inefficiency in schools, and so some of those schools are going to get more and some are going to get less money. But what the state can do, to answer the second question, what the state can do to encourage those small towns is that base has to be there. Currently, our law provides that if the enrollment gets under 35 for 2 years, you lose your state aid. And I know that that has been a decision that was made by the legislature several years ago. Nothing magic about 35 students, but that is the point beyond which this legislature, this state has decided they are not going to provide state aid.
There's a bill working its way through the legislature that would, I think, take away the $10,000 subsidy for rural attendance centers. But we also heard in testimony in committee, like in Meade County, where schools can be like 30 miles apart, though the school may only serve 3 or 4 children. How can we balance, people not having to drive an hour or 2 to go to school? And in the case of this Meade County school, they're having to ford streams. I mean, it was just incredible the things they had to do to get their kids to school, yet consolidate and be more efficient. How do we encourage those two things?
It's you get into the northwestern part of the state, and there are some, geography is going to a large extent put limitations on consolidation of schools or efficiency. Let me tell you what I think we are doing and should be doing, and those school districts should be looking at. We should be looking at distance learning. We should be looking at of sharing resources. There are some efficiencies that can be brought about by sharing teachers in certain academic disciplines, by sharing administrators. Those are the kinds of things that are being experimented with, and I think are very important in the future. There's going to be some real hardships in some of these areas because of the distances that have to be driven in order to get young people to the schools. Just sheer geography makes it impossible.
Gotten a few more gambling questions in, Governor. From Sioux Falls, this viewer calls in, by eliminating the ceiling on interest rates for credit cards 10 years ago, we experienced a substantial boom in our economic development effort, i.e. Citibank coming to South Dakota. Why not treat the gambling industry the same and lift betting and gaming limits to leverage our economic development effort and recognize gambling as a legitimate industry in South Dakota?
Just because you can't, my answer to that question was you can't compare gambling and banking. I mean, it's just, I think we're talking about 2 different things. Now, having said that, there is no doubt that the video lottery and Deadwood and so forth, Deadwood, one of the things when we talk about Deadwood gaming, there are 2,200 jobs that have been created out there. $23 million in investment in that community, private investment in that community. It is an industry, and I don't know, I think it's going to be successful. I think that community has really worked hard to get its act together and are making some real improvements. But I don't think that you can draw a comparison between, the banking industry and gaming.
Maybe the savings and loan industry and gaming.
No comment. Not the savings and loan industry in South Dakota.
No,
we're in good shape in South Dakota.
No,
well regulated and sound.
Another gambling question from Sioux Falls. Why wasn't $20 million from revenues from gambling earmarked for education only, and would this be a good idea?
Everybody wants to earmark gaming gaming revenue. It's all spent. I tell you, the revenue, and there's a considerable amount of revenue in our budget from video lottery, and it's going to social services and human services. It is supporting the local mental health centers. It is not specifically dedicated to education, but we chose to dedicate a real reliable income source to education. That's 56.25% of our sales tax base. It has resulted in record amounts of revenue from the state going back to local schools.
Okay, with a lot of South Dakotans in arms in the Reserve and Guard in the Middle East right now, this takes on some relevancy. From Pierre, a couple of questions. Why doesn't South Dakota give a 50% cut in tuition for National Guard members? And they were wondering if you could comment on students who have been discharged from Army and the military and joined the Guard cannot receive educational benefits. Why? So I guess kind of a two-parter there.
Well, The first part of the question is there are tuition breaks for people who are in the National Guard. That was done several years ago, and I know it is a valuable recruiting tool for the National Guard. It's also a very valuable educational tool for the Guardsmen and women who have taken advantage of it. I'm sorry, I can't answer the question. Somebody that was on active duty and then goes into the Guard does not get benefits.
That's what their question seems to be saying.
I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry. I'll have to take the name and I'll have to take the name of the individual and get it. I did not know that that was the fact.
Could they call, was it Veterans and Military Affairs?
Well, we have Veterans Affairs officers in every county in the state, but I'd be happy to get them or to get the answer if I have the name and telephone number.
Okay, well, they can call back and tell our phone volunteers, or they can call your office tomorrow. Very quickly, Governor, less than a minute, what are you proposing for funding for gifted education? And are you proposing an increase for next year?
We have a pattern of funding gifted education, and I believe that it is 50% of the cost of gifted education. Made a big jump last year in that, and I think the 50% is accurate. I'm sorry, I don't have my budget book in front of me, but I think that's accurate.
Okay, we have 30 seconds. Any big surprises that you foresee before we close the session out for the year?
Oh, this is going to be a good session. I'm really, there's been a lot of positioning going on. This is the 15th day of the legislative session. By the end of this week, we'll almost be at the halfway mark. In education and health care and human services and so forth, we're in good shape in the state of South Dakota. We've got a good program, and I'm excited about this session.
Well, thank you, Governor. I'm sorry we're out of time. Thank you for visiting with me and the people of South Dakota and for inviting us into your reception room. Next Tuesday night at 9 Central, 8 Mountain on another State House special will again be live from the Capitol and Pier. Our guests will be the Republican and Democratic legislative leaders, and they'll also take your questions about the session. That's a State House special. Ask legislative leaders next Tuesday night at 9 Central, 8 Mountain here on South Dakota Public Television. So from the Governor's reception room in the Capitol and Pier, I'm Todd David Epp. Thanks for watching us this evening. Good night.
Next week on South Dakota